Hello and welcome to the podcast of FringeArtCulture.com. This podcast aims to enrich the community by focusing on local art and culture. We are your hosts. I'm Grant and this is Alison.
Hey, how you going?
And today we have with us special guest Sebastian.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome to episode 9.
On this podcast, we'll be exploring in more depth the topics raised and artists featured on the blog during the month.
But we also want to hear from you. Hit us up on the comments or on our contact page. Let us know what you're up to. We want this to be a community built by the community for the community. We'll be chatting with artists, authors and musicians, sharing with you the best of what we can find in our local community, including author readings, flash interviews with musicians and sets from amateur comedians. And we'll be catching you up on what's been happening and what's coming up in the local area. All this on demand when it's convenient for you via the blog or your podcast provider of choice. So this month on the blog, we looked at value. How do we define the value of something? Obviously, there's lots of ways of doing that. You could use like a deontic logic to kind of say what obligations there are to certain things, what you can do to achieve those outcomes. Okay, so if I say I like my personal autonomy, okay, so I don't want anyone interfering with me, so therefore I can say it's good to then not impede on other people's personal liberty, and I would see value in anything that was put in place to kind of secure that. So I could put value in that. So that would be valuable. So any law that was put in place or something like that that secured that would be valuable. You know,
Is that based off a sort of almost underlying selfish tendency, kind of overlaying altruism in a sense that if it's something you want, then acting in that particular way may guarantee it because you have an expectation that others will as well?
Yeah, you have to. It is making an assumption that other people would also.
It's the well-being thing. If I want well-being for myself, then obviously other people want well-being for them.
I think the key word for me in that was obviously, which isn't so obvious. Yeah. I have I guess another sort of working theory on not so much values itself, but values does fit into this quite easily, which actually came out of I was looking up some relationship advice. And I came across this article by a psychologist who basically said what we actually look for in relationships. And there was only 2 words. There was novelty and security. And when you kind of remove the sort of the humanistic or the romantic aspect out of relationships, and you think about it purely from sort of almost like a relative frame theory in psychology, where you only know about stuff that isn't you because you are not a part of it, therefore it is something different that you cannot contrast with. It seems to me that you could almost apply that theory and say that anything that we value must be, or presumably is, because it gives you some measure of security and novelty.
But that's well-being, because we have an instinctual need to survive. So our well-being is tied up into that.
Oh, no doubt, yeah. I think the thing is, though, is when we look at the counterintuitive example of novelty, part of our well-being is actually also to take risks, which could actually damage our potential success at maintaining that well-being to satisfy other parts of our well-being.
Yeah, I know, but when you're talking about values and valuing things that are cross boundaries across lots of different people. If we're just talking, because obviously there's going to be subjective values. Some people are going to value risk taking against other people because they have personality that are predisposed to that. But when we talk about very basic instinctual values, our instinctual values are for self-preservation, and to say that in a selfish way, it means obviously somebody else, and like you said, the obviously thing, obviously other people are going to be self-preservation, have that sort of same value as well. Even someone who is severely depressed and doesn't see value in their own life still has a value of self-preservation at some level. So when you look at well-being broken right down, regardless of all the other subjective stuff that comes into play, that's what I see as value, stripped right back to its bare bones. And like, you can dress it up in all sorts of ways. And when we talk about arts and culture as far as value goes, it makes it a lot more difficult because it can be emotional and, values taken in other sorts of ways. But that's where I strip it right back, if that makes sense.
So if we talk about value from an art culture sense, the subjective enjoyment from art culture is valuable because it feeds back into that well-being aspect.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like a connection aspect that feeds into that, because if someone's going to connect with something, then they're going to feel involved and feeds into their self-preservation. Because if someone feels so disconnected from everything, then that self-preservation, even though it's there, is going to become less. I guess that's kind of what I was talking about before when you say depression. But that connection is subjective, so it's not the same across everything.
Yeah, it's not the same for each person.
Yeah. So someone who sees a black wall and of nothing but black, somebody might look at that and go, "That's exactly how I feel. Thank you." And somebody else is going to go, "What the fuck?"
So it has subjective value, but it achieves an objective good.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, there's definitely some objective goods that are achieved through subjective means. I think that's true. I don't know how everyone else feels about that, but I think that you can reason your way to that.
Well, I just base it back on my original theory, which is if you're creating a connection there, if they feel relatable to the black wall because that's how they're feeling, then they're gaining a sense of security in the fact that they're not alone.
Yeah.
When you look at art being subjective, I thought it was really interesting when you looked at the portraits that we got Damien Smith to do of us for Fringe. My mum looked at those and she said, "I don't like that. I don't get it." But it was because of the style that Damien portrayed, and like the dripping and the horns and all that kind of stuff that got wrapped up in that image, that she just kind of went, "I don't understand why you would do that." And that cognitive dissonance between the style of artwork and what she saw was kind of like, oh.
But is that a disinterest in engaging in the philosophy behind what is done?
Yeah, so how do you get that person to then go, "I don't really understand it. How do I make the effort?"
Well, okay. Well, I guess that's the part of the story, the narrative that you have to, that's one of our challenges at Fringe.
Context.
Is to actually bring in the narrative that is behind these artists. So each artist has their own way of doing things because of the things that they bring into it through their personal experience. Their personal experience colours their artwork. Their personal philosophy colours their artwork, which Damien does with his stuff. Therefore, if you don't engage with the artist, it makes it harder to engage with the art. But apart from that, there is your own personal experience. So there's two facets to an artwork. There's what it says to you and what it says to the artist. And if you look at it from that postmodern kind of idea that the artwork doesn't have any inherent meaning, it means whatever it means to the person who's looking at it at the time, you need to bring in the emotional element into that and actually say, "I want to connect with other people." You're saying, "I want to connect with the artist, therefore I'm willing to kind of have that two-way conversation."
Yeah,
if you're not willing to have the two-way conversation, then you've only got one facet of the art.
I think we're in a privileged position where we've been able to connect with the artist quite frequently. And a lot of the artworks we present, specifically me because I'm writing lots of the articles, but I'm able to connect with their meaning in the context because I have investigated it quite thoroughly before I represent it.
Yeah.
So I'm quite ready and available to be able to make that bridge in order to do and see that value. Whereas lots of people, and in fact the general population, is more likely not to make that bridge or make that effort to see the artist's point of view or even attempt to make their own sorts of value, achieve, some sort of space where they can say, oh, I see value from this representation, because they haven't been exposed to art as in that way.
Okay, well, we have an interview coming up with Damien Smith. It'll roll into a couple of episodes because it's quite a long one. So I hope you guys enjoy that, and thanks for listening.
I've been at work upon this geometry of four dimensions for some time.
Your main mediums you work in?
At the moment, acrylic paints on canvas.
Yep.
And pencil, I use Derwent graphite pencil and Prismacolor coloured pencils are my preferred mediums at the moment. One of the pencils that I've been interested in trying is, I think it's called Caran d'Arche or Carvan d'Arche or something like that. It works out to be something like $5 a pencil.
All right.
So when you're looking at getting, a set of 100 pencils, it's $500 just to see what you think.
So you've experimented recently with a bit of gold foil.
Yes, that was just I'd read about it, seen a few other artists using it, and just sort of wanted to have a go at it. Pretty easy to use. Some of the stuff I'd read had said that it's very messy and that it's very hard to control and that sort of thing. I didn't find that at all.
Maybe it comes down to the quality of the product, maybe, that they have.
Yeah, it could be, yeah. So, and I mean, I was, sensible enough to. Some people said, "Oh, do it outdoors because it gets messy," but then you've got all the breeze and all the rest of it. So, I just did it indoors. Made sure that I had a vacuum cleaner handy, and any excess gold foil I just vacuumed up, or I had a little brush and I got a little jar of excess gold foil that I'd keep aside, and I'll use that.
Dust.
It's fairy dust.
You can use it on I noticed you're advertising the canvases for weddings.
Yeah. Yep.
Yep.
Be a nice little embellishing on there. So absolutely.
So you've studied your craft, haven't you? You've been.
Yeah. So I went to Griffith Uni, Queensland College of Art. Graduated in 2003 with a Bachelor of Arts in Fine Art, and I guess my time there was well spent to explore different mediums and to do a little bit of networking and that sort of thing. But really at that point I didn't know what sort of art I wanted to create, didn't know what sort of artist I was. So there was pros and cons to it. The majority of what I've actually learnt as an artist has happened afterwards.
Do you think it gave you confidence to do that?
That's probably the main thing, that it probably just allowed me that 3-year period to explore different mediums, to be in a comfortable space where I could seriously look at art and say, is this actually what I want to do?
Basically like a grounding to build off of.
Yep. And it also gave me a few years to actually grow up a little as well, And then out of uni, I would categorise my work out of uni as fairly immature. It was paintings that would be similar to glamour photography, but zoomed in, so it was like eyes, lips, still largely around the beauty aspect. And then from there I went into a focus on, I suppose, like street art, animation, that sort of thing. So I explored a few areas there.
Is it where your pop art has come from?
Yeah. So I spent probably about 5 or 6 years in that space. And I was quite, doing quite good work there. I think, again, doing probably around 2 exhibitions per year, selling out of most work, and works were selling for between $300 and $800.
Yeah.
That was pretty good for 23, 24-year-old. Yeah, so that worked well, but then as with, all stages, I got to a point where I just had nowhere else to go with it. Wasn't getting the same enjoyment, needed to explore another path. So things sort of stagnated for a little while, over a couple of years, and then probably the last 5 years, I guess, have sort of reignited and started those few years of exploring different techniques. Last year was largely about the finger painting. So I think last year I did about 30 paintings purely in finger painting, and that was good. Again, very successful, a lot of exposure and that type of thing, and it helped me to, I suppose, expand my ability in the sense that, you know, realism doesn't have to be achieved through accuracy, so to speak. You know, realism can be achieved through impressionist or expressive styles as well. So yeah, that sort of opened up my way of thinking and my ability and how I'll probably create work moving forward. And I would say that the stuff that I create moving forward will be a bit of a hybrid of the two, so a bit more restraint and control, but still trying to look for areas that I can open up and work a bit loosely so that you get that creative depth to it.
So what do you say your main influences were back then as opposed to now?
So my main influences when I was going through uni and all that sort of stuff and starting out was more around historical artists. So looking at, you know, Salvador Dali, Picasso, all the, you know, the big ones. One of my favourite all times was Rembrandt, and that was, you know, going through school and then university. That was where a lot of my influence was based on their work, their experience.
You go through a lot of art history at that time, anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Whereas now, my influences are more around my experiences and my surroundings. So nature and beauty are a lot of the, I suppose, the tangible influence that I work with. And then mortality and morality are more my philosophical influences that I work with. And then I guess the other thing that I suppose the third prong that inspires me these days is the other artists that I work with or that I see.
I was going to ask you, peers, are peers a big influence?
I suppose that's, rather than influence, that might be more a motivation. So looking at other artists and the work they're doing and the different techniques they're achieving motivates me to want to try new things and continue growing and, you know, keep improving.
Are you from Brisbane?
Brisbane.
Or where are you from?
Yeah, originally born in Rockhampton, but I moved from Rocky at age 6. We relocated to Brizzy, so yeah, basically grew up in Brizzy. And stayed in Brizzy for all my life until I finished uni, and then I packed up and went overseas to the UK and lived there for 2 years and did that sort of thing. And then that started my enjoyment of travel. So probably since there I've been to about 20 different countries through Europe, the US, Asia, and that type of thing.
Is there any art that you experienced overseas that really resonated with you?
Gaudi's Cathedral and his work in Spain was probably, you know, part of the more inspirational because it's very environmentally based creations. And it's just out of this world, you know, there's nothing else like it. So, and then, you know, while I was travelling, I got to see some of, you know, the greats that I grew up and inspired by. So, you know, I think somewhere in Europe I went to a Picasso museum and saw some of his larger original works, and likewise with Van Gogh and Salvador Dali and a few others. So it's, you know, it's good to actually see the heroes that you grew up with, and
it's such a different thing seeing things in person.
It is, and I guess growing up seeing all the work in books, it just never enters your mind that you're going to get to see these things in the flesh and experience. You know, when you look at a piece of art in a book and they give you want to this is what you experience, and this is where the eye is drawn, and this is what you feel, and all that sort of thing, and then you get there and you actually get to experience it without a book telling you what you're experiencing. So yeah, it's a very, very cool thing to...
I think the good thing, I suppose, about art history, and I've thought about this over the years, has been that even though, you know, you kind of get that thing from a book where people tell you how they feel, and they've done the critique, and they've done the analysis, and they've done the analysis of this person's life, and the whole lot that goes with it, is that even though you've got all that mixed up, because it's been so varied and so famous and from all these different places, you kind of get to see the juxtaposition of what everybody else thinks, so you can approach that painting in a way that makes it that you can just think what you want to.
Yeah.
Whereas in
Yeah.
everyday art, that seems to get a bit lost because
Yep.
people don't know how to do that because there hasn't been there's
Yeah.
not that dialogue around it, if that
Yep.
makes sense.
Yeah, you're experiencing the artwork for the first time, but with an enormous sense of familiarity
Yeah, exactly.
around the artwork.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, that's a completely unique experience to artworks that are, famous through the test of time.
Yeah.
There's not many current day artists that get that same
Yeah.
experience with their work. So, yeah, it's very cool.
Mm. So how do you think growing up in Brisbane influenced your work, if anything?
I think, initially my influence was quite limited because, growing up in Brisbane around the 90s, late 90s and that sort of thing, Brisbane's culture was very much beer garden.
Yeah.
Watch the game of footy, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
We didn't really have, art cafes and
Yeah.
trendy hotspots and all that sort of thing. That's been a more, the last 15 years
Yeah.
that has progressively developed rather than back then. So, it's been good to see that platform evolve. But then I think certainly travelling and getting outside of Brisbane and outside of Australia opened my eyes to what art actually means.
Yeah.
The relevance it can have to the environment that you're living in and creating and
Yeah.
that type of thing. So, so I think sometimes, well, for me to get away from Brisbane really helps to then come back and look at what's around me and how I can integrate into the environment around me.
Yeah.
And I guess it also helps me realise that as an artist, I don't necessarily want to be pigeoned to just my local demographic. I would prefer to be working with themes and concepts that can be approached more globally than...
Yeah, a bit more universal.
A bit more universal, yeah.
Okay, so what throughout your life made you want to be a creative artist? Like, where did your love of drawing, or was it something in
colouring in books?
Yeah,
that's where it all started.
I'm a big fan of colouring in books.
Yeah, I loved comics, colouring in books, and cartoons growing up.
Yeah.
So, and that's all comes back to art. So, when I was in early primary school, I'd be copying my favourite heroes and all that sort of thing. And then it just evolves more into art as I grew up. I guess it could have quite easily taken a left turn and ended up in animation or, more specifically in commercial illustration and that type of thing.
Yeah.
But I guess I prefer to work more on singular frame.
Yeah.
To express an experience in a singular frame rather than
a narrative. As
a narrative, yeah. So, but that's where it all started, and then it just evolved from there. I've just always done art, and then through primary school, it was always my focus. I was always putting a lot more time and effort into art than anything else, and then in high school, the same thing. In uni, I probably got a bit relaxed with things in uni for the first couple of years because I was, just going through that stage of figuring out who I was as a person, living life a little.
Yeah.
And then it sort of came back around, third year uni where I started to get involved in exhibitions and starting to figure out that I wanted to, actually be an artist. And
so do you think uni was helpful in a way that it actually taught you how to approach exhibiting?
No.
No? That was just stuff that you learnt through the contacts that you made and...
Yeah, more by necessity. So I think in uni we got exposed to probably on 3 different opportunities, which were generally the end of year exhibitions where we put in touch with the university, and because we're university students, we sort of got our foot in the door with getting an exhibition.
Yeah.
Because it's the university, emerging artists, graduating exhibition, whatever.
Yeah.
And then being a group exhibition, we just all sort of pitched in. We'd have people who would chair, treasure, and curate and that type of thing, and then we'd all put together 2 or 3 works. I mean, it was good in the sense that as a second year uni student, I got to have a uni artists group exhibition at Metro Arts in Brisbane City, which that's
pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. And then by third year and first year out of uni, I was starting to utilise cafe space and small galleries. So I think I worked with Balimba Art Gallery, set up a exhibition there. There used to be a place called George on George Street across from the casino in the city, where it was a fairly swanky sort of restaurant, and I'd sort of set up a residency with them where I would do 3 or 4 exhibitions there per year. I set up a few in nightclubs along Caxton Street where we just put up the works, direct one of their spotties, and people would party and that sort of thing.
It's an interesting scene.
It is.
I don't think a lot of people would actually consider that.
No, but yeah, I suppose I was thinking more about the spaces that I was actually socialising in. And these were the people I was meeting, and they would find out I was an artist, or I would approach them and let them know that I wanted to exhibit and sell my work. And the good thing about a lot of that is they would let me do all this with no commission, so anything I made was all in my pocket, and they would just make it clear that I was responsible to, if I entered this agreement, I had to make sure that there was art on the walls. And it had to be of a certain standard, obviously. And then it wasn't until, obviously, then I travelled away and then came back, did a few exhibitions here and there, did a few over in the UK. And then I sort of got busy being an adult. And
responsibility kicks in.
Responsibility kicks in, work a real job for a few years. It wasn't until about 2008, 2010 that I started to get back into it properly, and then put together a series of works. And in between I did small little things. I had a studio space set up where I was living, so if I knew people were all going for some social event, then I would invite them to the studio for drinks before or after, and that normally resulted in 3 or 4 art sales. So it's amazing what happens when you get people a little bit boozed and and excited about your artwork. So alcohol helps.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we've talked a bit about your influences and inspiration, but I noticed particularly over the last little bit you've shared some of the online work that you're loving.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose with the saturation of Facebook and Instagram, it makes it very easy now to be aware of other artists that are out there. That's probably one of the big things that Facebook went through their little phase of people being able to sell art very well on Facebook, and then they changed their algorithms and made it now more a pay-to-play kind of formula. And I would say Instagram's probably heading in the same way. Instagram is quite saturated now as well, so it's a bit hard to actually get flagged in there. But initially I suppose one of the big things was that people would get a lot of exposure on those platforms, and now that everyone's on there and everyone's following 1,000 different people, it's very easy to get lost in the masses. But so I suppose I did a bit of a cull of the people that I follow, and there's some interesting ones on Instagram where they do like artist spotlight. So the purpose of their account is purely to showcase other artists. So that's been a good way for me to find other artists. And then just networking with, talking to other people that I know, and they say, oh, I know this artist and I follow this artist, and that type of thing. And then I suppose...
And that particularly helps with the local scene. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Once other people locally start following you, then you pop up on their feed, and they... and if they comment, then that pops up as well. But I think, certainly now that I do have a little bit of a community and people that are engaged with my work, when I'm building up a folio or building up works, or when I don't have stuff to show and share, it's a good opportunity for me to share other artists that I'm appreciating at the time, whether they're local or international or whatever. I just think it's a good means to
it provides that narrative in the context behind the work that you don't necessarily get.
Gives a bit more context for the work that I'm creating. And it also opens people up to the other artists that I get to see that they might, if they're only following 3 artists on Instagram because they know someone who knows someone.
I was a bit annoyed recently actually because they, for a month or so there in one of their updates, they had tabs at the top of Facebook where you could just choose your art and culture. And I would constantly be on that tab because I just wanted to see that stuff and I didn't care about the rest of it. But they've removed it.
Oh, have they?
Yeah, and it's all gone now. So you can't separate, because you were having to pick topics for things. So those topics were relating to those tabs, and all that's just disappeared.
Yeah, it's constantly changing.
I was like, God damn it.
Yeah.
Because that was really handy to be able to, I guess, focus your feed because you do get such a dilution of everything.
Yeah. I guess that's the tricky thing with an artist that, Facebook and Instagram and all the rest are great in the sense that you can address your wider audience. But then an artist still needs to exhibit their work, so identifying who your niche market is really important to choose, make good choices on where you're actually exhibiting your work and who you're exhibiting with and your different platforms there. So, I've got 10 paintings in the garage that are currently lined up to go into the next space and all that sort of thing, and the show at Percolator to show new works, and so over the last few months I've sort of stopped and had a bit of a serious think about who actually buys my work. Who are the people who have traditionally, rather than just say they like my work, actually, coughed up the money and put one of their works up in their house. And
what did you find there?
In a nutshell,
it's a hard thing.
It is, it's a really hard thing. But if I go through just the numbers of who these people are and if I categorise them, generally it's either people around their 30s or people around their sort of semi-retired age. Who I suppose value art, so they're cultured, I guess, cultured, trendy, that sort of thing, and so they see the value in and can afford to spend that sort of money. They might, rather than get clothes or a new camera or a laptop or whatever for their spouse or kids or whatever for Christmas or birthdays, they'll fork out and get a painting or a piece of jewellery or something like that instead.
It's interesting that we sort of found the same thing generally across the board because I guess people in their 20s, although they might get out there a bit more, their priorities are a little bit different and they've probably got a little bit more responsibility as far as setting up their life goes, as far as how they spend their money. So it tends to be the people in their 30s who do get to that point where they're like, and they start to, deepen their respect for everything that's around them or whatever. And then there's that jump because by the time you get to 40 and 50 and stuff, other things become important. And then
you go through that whole having kids stage where you don't get
and like because people are
don't have the spare money.
They're having kids later, and we're sort of probably the exception to the rule there a little bit. Whereas, and then they've prioritised with raising that, and they've got their kids going through high school the next 2 decades. And then get to semi-retired age and get that freedom back to be able to go back to the industry a little bit.
The interesting thing that I did find is that the people that spend the serious cash are business owners. People that are buying artwork for the workplace. They're forking out, $3,000 for a painting and just accepting that's how much it costs and it's going to add awesome value to their business. So it's, it's an interesting thing that, how do you find those people? How do you,
Yeah.
you know, engage them? And, you know, but I think it still comes down to the art experience. You know, ultimately they're going to connect with a certain artist or connect with a certain artwork that's going to work for their business or work for them personally.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess it's you know, largely, I guess if we put it into a category, then it's, yeah, people that are independent, financially and yeah, culturally educated. Yeah, or culturally aware. Educated is probably not the right word.
So obviously success is different for everybody.
Yes.
How do you think, what do you define success as an artist being personally?
Yep.
And when do you think you've achieved that?
Yep. I wrote an answer for this one, so I'm going to read it out.
All right.
That's a bit naughty, but... so I said that success for me is to be making a healthy living from practicing my art. I don't anticipate that this will be from one channel in my case. It will most likely be through art sales, print sales, merchandise, art classes and art social events. And from what I've experienced, when you do something you love, it gives you more energy to keep going because you are happy doing it. And when you are spending 8 hours a day doing something other than what truly makes you happy, it takes twice as much energy to do it. So basically, to live a healthy, energetic life, you need to do what you love or learn to love what you do. So that's where success is for me. If you're spending your 8 hours a day doing stuff that you love,
Yep.
then you're successful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I love doing art. So
Yep.
I'm not at the point where I'm spending 8 hours a day doing it yet. But that's the goal,
Yep.
is to have a mixture of different things that I employ to earn a living from
Yep.
my art. Ideally to, you know, be engaged with community, and be less reliant on the mundane bullshit that happens around most office-based jobs, where you're doing work just for the sake of work and micromanagement, just for people to be accountable and to be controlled
Yeah.
and all the rest of it. I mean, if I look at my professional career outside of art and look at the other work that I've done over the last 10 years, you know, there's so much time that's spent doing, you know, the reports and creating all this information and data to feed up to someone to justify someone's position, to justify someone else's position. And
But yeah, you are working for somebody else's end.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing. And I think as approaching it as a writer, it's a similar thing.
Yeah.
And although, you know, there are avenues that you can take that generate a lot of income as a writer, my passion is fiction. And so I'm opting to diversify and like you have been. But in a certain sense, the other experience I've had has given me that knowledge to be able to do the business side, because
that's right.
you know, as an artist, you have to be able to call yourself a business owner, because you know, you are the representative of that, and there's a whole lot of stuff that comes with it. You know, it's the boring stuff, it's the tax, it's the reporting, it's all that kind of stuff that I guess in a roundabout way normal employment gives you that.
And I'm the same, that it's that career outside of art that has taught me how to, you know, write business case, how to write a project plan and all the rest of it, that in current terms with my art has now enabled me to figure out where I want to be from a business standpoint with my art, how I'm going to get there, and, you know, a financial pathway on how I'm going to get there and where I'm going to generate income from, steps that I'm going to take over the next, you know, 6 months to...
And I think that's where a lot of artists tend to fall down, because they do, you know, there's this intangible worth that, you know, comes with creating something that you love, and it really makes me angry, the dialogue, especially recently with the funding cuts. You know, it's a lifestyle choice. It's not a lifestyle choice. You can't devalue someone's life by telling them what they do and what they love isn't worthwhile.
Being a politician is a lifestyle choice.
I think I mean, what I was getting at before around the the 9 to 5 office job, I guess, you know, there's a lot of benefits, as we said, that you get from that, but there's a lot of frills around that sort of industry that exist just to, as you say, keep the wheels turning. And you know, it keeps people employed and all that sort of thing. But, you know, I've been into a lot of workplaces where, as part of my job, it was to go to, you know, multiple workplaces, and you just see so many people unhappy, and it's, you know, so something's not working.
Yeah.
You know, I understand that you need a variety of jobs, and you need jobs that form the cogs to make things function.
But at the same time, we're also heading into an era, I think, where a lot of things are going to be automated.
Absolutely.
And so some of those positions are going to be made redundant.
Yep.
And as a society, we need to be able to create industries and just, make industries like arts flourish, because obviously there is value in there. There is a monetary value, and regardless of whether you want to see it as capitalism or not, you know, some people feel like selling their art cheapens it, but I think the opposite, because unfortunately we live in a society where value comes from money. Yeah.
Really, we just need other outlets for people to be productive. Yeah. And where roles can be automated, then automate them. Yeah. You know, but I think part of that, you know, we do need renewable energy, we do need sustainable materials and infrastructure and all that stuff to support, and, you know, so that
any industry relies on the arts to a degree. They rely on design, they rely on writers, they rely on all sorts of things.
Just imagine, I was just trying to think of what would a world without art look like, and I was just imagining a blank white can with Coke written in like Times New Roman on it, and that is what a world without creatives
looks
would
pretty
look
appealing.
And everything would look like that, and like a house without art. Like
it's the vision.
All of those bottles that you've got up there, all those fancy, and they're all unique. They would all just be a bunch of the exact same type of bottle.
What was that movie with? It's a few years old. It's the guy who played Batman.
I've seen it, but I don't know what it's called.
And they regulated their emotions and everything through medication.
Yeah, they all medicated themselves, and he was like...
To the point where they didn't even see colour. Everything they saw was in like a monochrome
grayscale,
grayscale,
Yeah, I don't think I've seen that movie.
It's pretty good. You should watch it. That brings part 1 of our 2-part interview with Damien to a close. The second part of this interview will follow early next week. Thank you for being with us, and as a reminder, leave your comments about the episode on the blog, Twitter or Facebook. Share the podcast by sharing the Twitter or Facebook post for this episode, and if you like what we're doing and you want to get involved, hit us up on the contact page. See you next time.